Disclaimer: this story is a work of true events narrated from personal perspective. Some names, places, and identifying details have been changed to protect privacy. The content deals with sensitive topics including family conflict and infidelity, and viewer discretion is advised. This story is intended for mature audiences and aims to explore human emotions, moral dilemmas, and personal experiences. It was an ordinary Thursday morning, the kind where nothing out of the usual seemed likely to happen. Mom had just packed her overnight bag, preparing for a brief business trip, and the house hummed with the familiar sounds of routine: the hum of the refrigerator, the soft tick of the wall clock, and the distant sound of traffic outside. I watched her leave through the front window, a subtle sense of emptiness settling in the pit of my stomach. Dad, as always, stood at the doorway, waving casually, his expression a little too composed, almost rehearsed. For as long as I could remember, our home had been a delicate balance of routines, laughter, and the occasional arguments that never lasted more than a few hours. Mom's trips were nothing unusual. She traveled for work frequently, and Dad and I usually passed these moments quietly, often filling the silence with mundane conversations. But this time, something felt different. I couldn't place it at first. Maybe it was the way Dad avoided eye contact for just a fraction too long, or the small nervous gesture of him running a hand through his hair while making a casual joke. I tried to shake off the feeling and went about my usual day, making breakfast, scrolling through my phone, and tidying up the living room. The sunlight streamed through the blinds, casting striped shadows on the walls, and the ordinary smells of home coffee brewing, toast browning, should have reassured me. And yet, there was a subtle tension lingering in the air, like the calm before a storm. Dad was in the kitchen, pretending to read the morning newspaper, but his glances toward me were sharp and calculated. I caught him staring once or twice, quickly averting his eyes when I noticed. It was the sort of behavior that would usually go unnoticed, easily explained away, but today it gnawed at me. I tried to focus on breakfast, chopping fruit and pouring cereal, but a quiet curiosity began to build, a feeling that something unsaid was hanging in the room, waiting to be discovered. As the morning wore on, small things began to feel odd: a half-empty cup left on the counter, the faint sound of muted music coming from his phone, and the subtle way he lingered near the doorway as if expecting me to notice him. I had grown up trusting Dad, relying on him for guidance and protection, and yet, in this unusual stillness, I sensed an undercurrent of unease. The ordinary day, with its mundane rhythms and familiar warmth, had begun to feel like the calm surface of a lake, concealing something deeper, darker, and far more complicated. And then it happened, the first words that made my chest tighten and my mind whirl with confusion. But before that, I had to make a choice: to ignore the subtle signs or to pay attention, to trust my instincts or brush them aside. Little did I know that the decision I was about to make would set the stage for a day unlike any other, a day that would leave an indelible mark on my understanding of family, trust, and temptation. After the quiet morning, the day seemed to stretch endlessly, but something about Dad's behavior kept nagging at me. He moved through the house differently, as if each step were calculated, each gesture measured. The casual air I was used to, the relaxed posture, the easy jokes, the gentle teasing was gone. In its place was something almost performative, a subtle tension that made the walls of our home feel smaller, more confining. I found myself watching him more closely, noting the way he glanced at his phone every few minutes, then quickly hid the screen when I happened to look. At lunch, he was unusually chatty, asking questions that felt oddly personal. "Do you ever feel like people don't tell you everything?" he asked casually, spoon hovering over his plate of soup. I paused, caught off guard, and shrugged, trying to mask my curiosity. "Sometimes," I said lightly, but his eyes bore into me, unblinking and intense. It was the kind of look that made me uncomfortable, like he was testing boundaries I hadn't realized existed. I felt a shiver run down my spine, but I told myself it was just nerves, that he was lonely without Mom at home, nothing more. Still, little details kept piling up. Dad kept leaving the room suddenly, often returning with a nervous laugh or an awkward explanation. A drawer I had never noticed before now seemed suspiciously out of place, slightly ajar as if inviting attention. The air in the house felt heavier, laden with unspoken words and withheld truths. Every time I tried to distract myself, by reading, listening to music, or scrolling on my phone, I caught him staring, as if trying to gauge my thoughts, my intentions, my reactions. By mid-afternoon, I noticed his tone shifting. The casual jokes carried subtle double meanings, the kind that linger in your mind long after they're spoken. "You know, sometimes people can't resist what's forbidden," he said, almost casually, while placing a cup on the counter. I froze, caught off guard, but he smiled like it was nothing, like he was simply making idle conversation. My stomach churned, confusion and a strange curiosity intertwining. Was it just a joke? Or was there something more behind the words, something I wasn't meant to understand yet? I tried to ignore the growing tension, telling myself I was overthinking. After all, Dad had always been playful with his words, sometimes teasing in ways that felt edgy but harmless. And yet, today was different. The ordinary day I had anticipated had transformed into a quiet storm of subtle hints and disjointed cues. I couldn't shake the feeling that Dad's behavior was intentionally revealing something, like a puzzle I was meant to solve but wasn't ready for. As evening approached, I found myself lingering near him more than usual, searching for clues, observing his movements, listening for any slip of words. Every glance, every sigh, every casual remark seemed loaded with hidden meaning. The house, once familiar and comforting, now felt charged with anticipation. And somewhere deep down, I realized that the ordinary day had ended. The extraordinary was quietly unfolding, beginning with these small, almost imperceptible hints. The evening settled over the house like a thick, soft blanket, yet the air felt heavier than ever. The familiar hum of home, the refrigerator, the ticking clock, even the distant sound of traffic seemed muted, replaced by a tense silence that wrapped itself around me. I was in the living room, pretending to read a book, but my attention kept drifting to Dad. He sat on the couch across from me, unusually still, holding a cup of tea in both hands. His eyes, normally warm and approachable, were sharp, calculating, and fixed on me with an intensity one hadn't seen before. Then he spoke, casually at first, as though it were nothing, as though it were the most natural thing in the world. "You know, sometimes people do things they shouldn't," he said, voice low, almost a whisper, yet heavy with weight. I froze mid-breath, my eyes widening. My mind raced, trying to process what he had just said. Was this another one of his strange jokes? Or was it something else, something I wasn't prepared to hear? I set the book down, suddenly hyper-aware of the space between us. "What do you mean?" I asked cautiously, my voice barely above a whisper. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he leaned back, fingers tracing the rim of his cup, eyes darting briefly to the window as if checking that we were truly alone. Then, almost casually, he said something that made my stomach drop. "Sometimes, when Mom's away, people can't resist temptation." The words hung in the air, dense and suffocating. My mind struggled to reconcile them with the father I thought I knew. Shock, confusion, and disbelief collided inside me. Part of me wanted to laugh, to tell myself it was a joke, a careless remark, but another part of me knew it wasn't. The way he said it, so calm, so deliberate, made it impossible to ignore. My pulse quickened, a mixture of fear, curiosity, and something darker I couldn't yet name coursing through me. I wanted to respond, to ask more, but my voice faltered. My thoughts raced. What could he possibly mean? Was it just words, or was it a hint of something deeper, something hidden behind the normalcy of our daily lives? Every instinct screamed at me to step back, to ignore the implications, yet a strange pull urged me forward, urging me to understand, to uncover the meaning behind his calm, measured confession. For a moment, we simply sat there, the silence between us heavier than any words could ever be. I could feel the tension vibrating in the air, each second stretching longer than the last. My mind replayed his words over and over, trying to decode, to comprehend, to prepare myself for what might come next. And in that moment, I realized that nothing would ever feel normal again. The ordinary day had vanished, replaced by a fragile, precarious tension that threatened to pull everything I knew about my family apart. It was in that silence, that heavy, almost tangible pause, that I made a choice, one that would change the course of the evening and perhaps my understanding of my father forever. The moment his words sank in, an unexpected storm of emotions surged inside me: shock, disbelief, curiosity, and a dangerous tinge of excitement. My mind raced, torn between what I knew was right and the irresistible pull of temptation. Dad had just said something that no child ever expects to hear from a parent, and yet, strangely, it awakened a part of me that wanted to understand, to explore, to know more. I felt a conflict I had never faced before, a moral tug-of-war between respect, fear, and an almost forbidden curiosity. I wandered through the house, pretending to tidy up, but in reality, my mind was calculating, searching for the next step. Each room I passed felt charged, every shadow heavier than usual. I could hear Dad moving behind me, and with every soft footstep, my nerves tightened and my pulse quickened. There was a strange intimacy in the silence, an unspoken tension that I couldn't ignore. It was as if the walls themselves were urging me to listen, to watch, to discover what lay beneath the surface of our ordinary family life. I found myself standing outside his study, a room I rarely entered. The door was slightly ajar, and the soft hum of his computer inside beckoned me. A voice in my head screamed to stop, to walk away, to respect boundaries, but another, louder, more insistent voice whispered that this was a moment I couldn't ignore. With a trembling hand, I pushed the door open just a crack and peeked inside. What I saw made my heart skip, though it was nothing yet scandalous, just Dad, focused on his screen, typing and occasionally glancing around as if he expected me to appear. My curiosity surged into action. I stepped inside, closing the door behind me, and the room felt suddenly smaller, charged with tension. The air smelled faintly of his cologne mixed with the lingering scent of coffee from earlier. Every step I took seemed louder than it should, echoing in my ears. I was acutely aware of the enormity of what I was doing. I was crossing an invisible line, but the thrill of the forbidden made my heart pound with anticipation. I paused behind his chair, eyes scanning his desk for clues, messages, notes, anything that might reveal the truth of what he meant earlier. My hands trembled slightly as I reached for his notebook, knowing fully well that I was venturing into a territory that should have been off limits. And yet I couldn't resist. That fleeting moment of hesitation, the tug of conscience, was quickly overshadowed by a sense of determination, a need to uncover what he had hinted at. As I opened the notebook, the first page revealed only mundane notes, but the air of anticipation made my heart race faster. I realized, in that instant, that curiosity was a double-edged sword. The longer I continued, the further I stepped from innocence into something morally complex. But I couldn't stop. The decision was made. The ordinary day had transformed completely. What started as a shocking remark had ignited a series of impulses I couldn't ignore, and there was no turning back now. As I flipped through the notebook, my hands shaking slightly, I realized that what I was seeking wasn't obvious, it was hidden in plain sight. The pages were filled with ordinary notes, reminders, and mundane details that any parent might keep. But nestled between the grocery list and household tasks were small, cryptic entries, phrases that hinted at a secret life I had never imagined. At first, I questioned myself, was I reading too much into casual words, or were these the first glimpses of something deeper, something forbidden? The first clue came in the form of a folded piece of paper tucked between two pages. Unfolding it, I found a message that made my breath catch in my throat, a short note, clearly written in Dad's handwriting, describing an encounter he had promised himself would remain secret. The words were calm, almost clinical, but the meaning behind them struck like lightning. The casual tone contrasted sharply with the content, and I realized that what had seemed like harmless notes were in fact records of actions that could shatter the family I had always trusted. My mind spun with conflicting emotions, disbelief, anger, and a deep, confusing sense of betrayal. How could someone I loved and trusted behave this way? And yet, a strange, almost magnetic curiosity kept me turning the pages, looking for more. Every entry I uncovered was like peeling back layers of a hidden world, one that existed parallel to the ordinary life I had always known. There were names, places, and coded hints, things that hinted at a connection I wasn't supposed to understand yet. I felt a creeping sense of guilt as I continued reading. This wasn't just about discovering a secret, it was about invading someone else's private thoughts, crossing boundaries I had been warned not to cross. My chest tightened as I realized the extent of what I had uncovered. I wanted to stop, to put everything back and pretend I hadn't seen it, but my curiosity was relentless. Each word pulled me deeper, each line a temptation that I couldn't resist, even as my conscience screamed at me to walk away. The room around me seemed to close in. The quiet hum of the computer, the faint ticking of the wall clock, and even the faint creak of the floorboards felt amplified. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears as I continued to dig deeper, piecing together fragments of a secret life that existed just beneath the surface of our everyday reality. The hidden world was unsettling, yet compelling, and I found myself teetering on the edge of understanding something that could never be undone. By the time I finally put the notebook down, I realized that the ordinary world I had known, family dinners, casual laughter, small routines, was gone. In its place was a fragile, dangerous understanding of the truth. The discoveries I had made were irreversible, and I knew that the next step, the confrontation with Dad or the decision to remain silent, would define not only the rest of the day, but also the delicate balance of trust and morality in our home. The hidden had been revealed, and nothing would ever feel the same again. The weight of what I had discovered pressed down on me like a heavy stone, and I knew I could no longer avoid the inevitable. I had to confront Dad. My mind raced with possibilities, anger, denial, or perhaps even an explanation that could soften the blow. Yet beneath it all, a gnawing fear told me that the truth, once spoken aloud, could unravel everything. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my trembling hands, and approached him in the living room, where he had been quietly reading, seemingly unaware of my presence. "Dad, I saw the notebook," I said quietly, the words feeling heavier than I expected. He looked up slowly, a flicker of recognition crossing his face, followed by a calm that unnerved me. He didn't raise his voice, didn't immediately defend himself. Instead, he set the book aside, leaned back in his chair, and studied me with an intensity that made my chest tighten. The silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating, as if the house itself were holding its breath, waiting for what would come next. I don't understand," I admitted, my voice wavering. Why would you do this? Mom's away, and I found these notes. My emotions were tangled, shock, anger, disappointment, and a deep, confusing sadness all collided at once. I felt my throat tighten, my hands clenching into fists. The father I had always trusted, the man I looked up to, suddenly seemed like a stranger, someone I barely recognized. Dad's voice, when he finally spoke, was calm, almost eerily composed. "I know," he said quietly. "I never wanted you to find out this way. But yes, I made mistakes. Things I shouldn't have. Things I regret." His words were measured, almost apologetic, but the weight of his actions lingered far beyond any apology. My heart raced, torn between a desire to lash out and a part of me that still wanted to understand, to find the person behind the mistakes, to reconcile the father I knew with the man who had betrayed the trust of our family. I struggled with the words, unsure whether to ask for more details or simply retreat into the quiet of the house, pretending I had seen nothing. But the confrontation had already begun in my mind, long before I spoke aloud. I realized that understanding wouldn't come without discomfort, without difficult conversations, and without facing the stark reality of human flaws. The father I loved was imperfect, dangerously so, and yet undeniably human. The room felt heavy with unspoken words. Every glance, every breath, every subtle movement between us carried meaning. I saw a flash of remorse in his eyes, a flicker of the man I knew before this discovery, and yet the shadow of betrayal loomed larger than ever. In that moment, I understood that confrontation wasn't just about uncovering the truth, it was about navigating the complex, painful web of emotions that followed, about acknowledging mistakes, and about grappling with consequences that could not be undone. By the end of the evening, the conversation had not fully resolved anything, but it had opened the door to reality. I was left with a mixture of emotions: anger, sorrow, confusion, and a strange, reluctant understanding. Facing the truth was only the beginning. How I processed it and what I chose to do next would define not just the rest of that day, but the fragile, evolving relationship I still had with my father. The house felt emptier than ever after the confrontation, though the walls were still full of echoes of the words spoken, the tension unresolved. I wandered from room to room, trying to make sense of everything I had discovered, but the ordinary routines no longer provided comfort. The laughter and small daily rituals that once defined our home seemed distant, almost artificial, as if I were living in a version of reality slightly askew. Every corner reminded me of the secret Dad had revealed, and every shadow seemed to whisper questions I wasn't ready to answer. Sleep was impossible that night. I lay in my bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the confrontation over and over. The images of Dad's calm face, his deliberate words, and the hidden notebook played in my mind like a haunting montage. I couldn't decide which emotion dominated: anger at the betrayal, sadness for the broken trust, or a reluctant curiosity about why he had acted as he did. Each thought spiraled into another, leaving me exhausted yet unable to turn away from the storm raging inside. In the quiet hours, I began to examine my own choices. Had I crossed a line by looking into the notebook? Was my curiosity as dangerous as his actions? The moral complexity of the situation weighed on me. On one hand, Dad's infidelity had shaken my understanding of family and loyalty. On the other, my own decisions, acting on impulses, seeking secrets, had drawn me deeper into a world I hadn't been prepared for. I realized that life was rarely simple, that good and bad often intertwined, and that human behavior was a maze of contradictions, motivations, and regrets. By morning, I had formed a fragile sense of perspective. I understood that while my trust had been shaken, it was not irrevocably destroyed. The events of the day had taught me that relationships, even familial ones, were layered, complicated, and sometimes painful. I also recognized the importance of boundaries, of understanding when curiosity can become destructive, and when confronting the truth is necessary for growth. It was a delicate balance, one I had only just begun to navigate. Even as the sun rose and Mom remained away, the house felt different, imbued with a quiet tension that could not be erased. I carried the knowledge of Dad's actions with me like a shadow, a constant reminder of the fragility of trust. At the same time, I carried a strange sense of resilience. I had witnessed human imperfection firsthand, grappled with moral ambiguity, and confronted a truth that many never face. In a way, I felt stronger, more aware of the complexities of human behavior, and more capable of making informed choices in the future. By the end of the day, I realized that life would continue, that my family would still function, and that my relationship with Dad could evolve, perhaps not as it once was, but with a new awareness and honesty. The aftermath of revelation was not simple or clean, but it was real. And in that reality, I found the first glimmers of acceptance, understanding, and a cautious hope that, despite betrayal, life could move forward. Days passed, and life slowly began to resume its familiar rhythm, but the echoes of that extraordinary day lingered in every corner of the house. Mom returned from her trip, cheerful and unaware of the storm that had quietly swept through our family while she was gone. I greeted her with a smile, carefully masking the turbulence inside me. Outwardly, things seemed normal, but I knew that beneath the surface, nothing would ever be quite the same. The revelation about Dad had permanently shifted the foundation of trust, creating cracks that could never fully be mended, but also opportunities for understanding, growth, and honesty. I found myself thinking about Dad in a new, complex way. The man who had shocked me with his words and actions was still my father, flawed yet human, capable of mistakes and capable of remorse. I realized that moving forward didn't mean pretending the past hadn't happened. It meant learning to navigate it, to interact with him through a lens that acknowledged imperfection while seeking accountability. I began to see the subtle ways he was trying to rebuild trust through honesty, through small gestures, and through an awareness of the fragile boundary that had been crossed. At the same time, I confronted my own behavior and impulses. The curiosity that had driven me to uncover his secrets had taught me both the dangers and the necessity of self-restraint. I understood that knowledge, once obtained, carries weight, and that our choices, even those motivated by curiosity, can have lasting consequences. I became more aware of my own moral compass, more deliberate in the decisions I made, and more capable of distinguishing between impulse and reflection. The events of that day had been a harsh lesson, but they were also a profound education in human behavior, family dynamics, and personal responsibility. As weeks turned into months, our family adjusted to a new normal. The tension lingered, but it transformed gradually into a cautious understanding. Conversations with Dad became more measured, honest, and at times uncomfortable, but necessary. I learned to forgive in a way that didn't ignore wrongdoing, but acknowledged growth and accountability. I also began to reflect on my own resilience, realizing that navigating the aftermath of betrayal required strength, patience, and a willingness to face uncomfortable truths. Ultimately, moving forward wasn't about forgetting, hiding, or pretending. It was about accepting reality, embracing the complexity of human relationships, and finding a way to coexist with the knowledge that people we love are imperfect. Life in our home continued, different from before, but not broken beyond repair. And in that difference, I discovered a subtle but powerful truth. Even in the face of betrayal, understanding, reflection, and deliberate choices can create a path forward, one step at a time. The day that began with ordinary routines had ended with a revelation that shook the core of my family, but it also marked the beginning of a journey, one of maturity, awareness, and resilience. And as I looked at Dad in the quiet moments, I realized that moving forward wasn't just about forgiveness or acceptance. It was about living honestly, acknowledging flaws, and learning to navigate the delicate balance between love, trust, and human imperfection. 6.